So, this is my very good friend, David Chancey. I want to introduce you to him. I wanted to tell you a little story about him so you understand who he is as a person. I've known David about 6 years now, and his husband, Doug, and his two kids, Matt and Ben. And we've actually met at church. And
all the best people do still meet at church.
Yes, apparently. And David's just really, from the moment I met him, is one of my favorite people that I've ever met. He is wonderful. And to tell you about his character, David and Doug own a house that was built in the 1700s.
1787.
1787. It's a historical home. It's beautiful. And when Hurricane Irene hit a couple of years ago, their home was flooded. Almost the whole first floor. They lost both cars, did tremendous damage to their house and their property. And we went out to help with the cleanup one of the Saturdays.
Lots of shoveling.
Which took like about a year, I think, for you to finally get cleaned. And they'd been planning to open this bookstore, and they had like 5,000 books, and most of them were ruined. And it was really devastating, like all the damage it was for me going out there. And I'm out there, and I'm helping them, and I'm doing like the toys, and they have you're throwing some stuff away. Well, Doug, I don't even know if you remember this, Doug came in and was like, oh, you can't get rid of that. And their boys were older now, and these were like little Weeble Wobble toys that they didn't play with. And I said, oh, okay, do you want me to clean it?
But he threw away my winter coat, but he kept his.
Yes, but I could tell that Doug was having like this.
He was having separation issues.
He was having like such a hard time, and I have to say that David, through the whole thing, and the boys were kind of, having a rough time. All their things were destroyed, like a lot of their things were destroyed, and David was just like the calm. The David you see here is the David you saw there. Like, he just doesn't change. He's like the anchor. He's like the person, like if you're going through a rough time, you want David there. So I just wanted to give you a picture of who he is as a person, that literally in the storm, he is like the pillar that's standing.
Well, we were in the house when it flooded because we'd come back from being evacuated. So when we knew the water, it's after the rain stops that the water is beginning to rise. And so we're moving the cars to the road, which is the high point. Then our backyard begins to get closer and closer. And then you see the water begin to really rise. So we're grabbing things on the first floor and trying to take them up. And at that point, just the water begins pouring in. So you get children out of the water and you have a picnic upstairs, things you do. And you look out the windows and you see if you can identify all the things floating down because the water was high. It's like, why, that's Mr. Summers' house. Part of the back porch is going. So you do things like that. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'll try to live up to it. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my family. Let me see. Doug and I have been together for 35 years. We come from very different places. So if you believe that opposites attract, aside from the fact that we're both gay, there's not a lot in our personal history. Doug is Latino. He's Puerto Rican from the streets of New York, Bed-Stuy, and grew up in sort of an extended Puerto Rican family where both his parents worked at the Brillo factory, which was near the Brooklyn Bridge at that point. I grew up, I'm the son of Southern parents who crossed the Mason-Dixon line into Cincinnati, and I was born almost 60 years ago. This is the year I turned 60, so I'm adjusting to that, I hope pretty well. I grew up in a small family. I had an identical twin brother who has now died, and a younger sister, and I and Doug grew up. Doug is 4 years older than I am. So I grew up at a time when to be gay was the thing that never spoke its name. You simply did not talk about being gay. The American Psychiatric Association still considered it a disease. So a lot of my early life was simply coming to terms with what being homosexual meant. and what sort of happiness you might have. So as I look at the life that I am living now, it's like the trajectory of it is amazing. It's the fact that I right now have children is an amazing thing to me. The fact that in New York State and the majority of other states, I can adopt children. That's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, I will tell you that, even with all the progress that I see being made, we still have such a long way to go in terms of LGBTQ rights. If you're transgendered now, huge differences. So I'm going to tell you a few stories about my experience and who I am. Well, Doug is a Puerto Rican from New York. I am a WASP. I am a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, maybe of Southern parents, but both sides of my family were here for 4 generations before the Revolutionary War. So, blue blood, yes. But I think the one thing that saved me from being a very smug white person of power is the fact that I am gay and that Doug is Puerto Rican. And the life that we live has not been one which I might have lived if I was a little straight boy of Southern parents from Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's a good thing. Oh, praise God. That's a good thing. Because I don't really want to be that person. But still, growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s, you won't remember the 1960s, but after the Eisenhower 50s, it was a time of possibilities. Not if you were gay, or if you were black necessarily, but it was still a time of possibilities, particularly if you were this color. And the world loved Americans, and we hadn't started demonstrating against the Vietnam War, and everyone loved everyone, and we were in the best possible country. And then things began to develop a little bit, and people got a little more real. And I met Doug when I was 24. And golly, we lived a wonderful life of gay men in New York City. We lived in New York for almost 30 years as a couple. So, we did a wonderful thing. And then 2 friends of ours began to think about adopting children. Well, that was a thing for me. I thought, I'd always wanted children. Did not think that I was destined to have any. But I'd always wanted children. And so a couple we knew adopted, and it suddenly became a possibility for me. So Doug and I went to an open house in New York City for a very well-known and esteemed adoption agency run by talented social workers. And it was a wonderful program, and we sat there, and they had 3 adoptive parents talk. It was a little bit of a panel, and we were thrilled. And then at the end of that program, one of the people running it came up and said, "Oh, are you a couple?" "Yes, 20 years together." "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't let people like you adopt children." So, we of course at that point said, "Well, thank you very much. It's really been nice meeting you. Don't expect to see you again." So, at that point, we could have sort of circled our wagons and said, "Give up." But we talked to friends who were also interested, and we began the process of adopting our oldest son. It took us, and it was a private adoption, it took us almost 4 years. The nice thing is that over those 4 years, the way that I wait I have a project to do. Recognize? You have to have something to do. Well, I bought baby clothes. I bought clothes. I had 4 years of clothes. Warm, because you don't know if you're adopting a child in the summer or the winter. Get some more. Buy baby clothes. Well, it finally came. At that point, I was working as an administrator in a Catholic college. And the nice thing is, I ran a college campus. So before I even adopted, white man of privilege, popular, I established a daycare center so that when my child arrived, I'd have an on-campus daycare center. You've heard all these stories of these administrators who abuse power. I was one of them, apparently. So, the call came in, and finally, Matthew. So, I flew down. He was born in Texas. He had been in private care after being delivered for about 5 weeks because they hadn't been able to establish paternity. So they had to do things like advertise and one thing and another. Anyway, Matthew was put in my arms, and I will tell you that if you don't have children, even if you think you're prepared, if you think you are ready, if you intellectually just know, I've done the diapers, I know this, I know my life is going to change forever. Everyone who has children will tell you your life is going to change forever. And the sad thing is, no matter how you prepare yourself, it does. It changes forever right then and there. And you have to remind yourself that this is what you have, particularly for me and for us. This wasn't a slam bam, thank you ma'am, a night of passion, and 9 months later there's a baby. This was years, 4 years of clothes. This was years in the making. This was as intentional as parenthood ever gets. But Matthew was put in my arms, and it was a wonderful, scary thing. So, I'll be honest with you. When we had started the adoption process, I said to myself, I said to all the social workers, take any child, but I don't think I'm capable as a white man of power of adopting a black child. I'm not sure I can do the job for our, what I consider our racist, horribly still racist society. So, hi Ruth. Anyway, so Matthew arrives in our life, and golly, we believe that no child should be a only child. We really think if you are the son of gay parents, you probably need somebody else in your house, closer to your age. It's a good thing, you know. So as Matthew turned 6 months old, I said to Doug, we better start working on adopting another child. I mean, it took us 4 years of home studies and waiting, FBI checks. You know, when you adopt a child, you go everything. There is no secret that goes unturned about you as a person. So I said, we had better start now, and maybe by the time that Matthew is entering kindergarten, he'll have a little brother or a little sister. But the interesting thing is, because we adopted domestically, in the states that we adopted, of course, they would not let gay couples adopt. So I had to adopt as a single person. And that's part of the long wait. I was a, quote, as far as the adoption agency was concerned, I was a single man. And that put quite a bit of delay. So anyway, I said, we better start again. So even though our home study social worker knew we were a gay couple, all the papers were always written as a single parent adoption because If you're in Texas, Texas hasn't changed that much. And I lived there off and on for years. Texas hasn't changed that much. It's not a place to be gay in this country. It's not a place to easily adopt children. So anyway, we had Matthew. I said, Matthew should have a brother or a sister, probably a brother, since they won't place little girls with single men. Don't you know we all abuse female children, even if we're gay? So, no. So
I said, especially if you were gay.
Especially if you're
the
gay.
Public perception.
Oh, yes, those perceptions.
Yes.
So, we started the process, and friends of ours had adopted from New Orleans. So I said, Actually, friends of ours who was the nephew of one of Doug's sister's childhood friends, who is still now a family friend. But anyway, don't try to parse that out. But it's part of our larger sort of family group. So anyway, I call the adoption attorney. This was an adoption attorney in New Orleans. I say, I have a child. My home study had just expired. You know, you have to renew them every few years. So I called in the first week of June. I thought, this is going to take a few years to work its way around. Well, 6 weeks later, I hadn't even put in a formal application. I get a phone call. We think we have a baby for you. He's African American. He's black. And at that point I say, God has opened a door for me. This is obviously my son. So I say, great, but I don't have a home study. And they're saying, the baby's being born in 2 weeks. So, need I say, we rush around like crazy. And Ben was born. He was born early. But he was born at the end of July. So I fly down to New Orleans. And I pick Ben up. And if you've ever adopted children, you will know that you're suddenly getting a baby placed in your arms. It's a stranger. You may love that child on first sight, but that's a stranger. You don't know anything about them. What they like, what they don't like, what allergies they might have. It's a mystery, and you're probably in a hotel room. So, just as with Matthew, I didn't tell you, I'm probably the only, maybe not the only adoptive parent who, upon getting my first child, he had had a terrible gastric irritation while I was still in the hotel room. And he was having, let's just say, terrible gastric. And then he went stiff and then went limp. Well, thank you, Ruth. Yes, that doesn't make me feel like a complete fool. For Matthew, I then grabbed my child, threw him into the child street, started lickety-split in San Antonio, which is not a town that I knew very well. The police stopped me, and I said, I'm rushing the child to the hospital. So they gave me a little escort to the hospital. So I was there. They looked at him. He was fine. They said, here, have some Pedialyte. I had the child wrapped in a big blanket. It was a good thing because everything let loose. And I just wrapped the blanket tighter. She said, thank you so much, and carried my child home. And he went on soy formula. So it's all fine. So Ben is put into my arms. I'm in New Orleans, which Doug and I had visited many times as tourists. Doug is an attorney. He used to go to ABA conferences. Oh, yeah. The Big Easy, New Orleans. So you see New Orleans as I see it as a white tourist. Well, I now went, and Ruth knows Ben and Matt. So I went, and Ben, when I got him, he had just come out of neonatal intensive care. He was born early. He had some breathing difficulties. Even when he was a child, he was lean and long. You could tell muscles were going to go there, right there. So I get Ben, we're connecting, I let him sleep in my arms, all of that. So, but something, he seems to be starting to cough. So, what do? Well, run to a hospital. No, I call the adoption attorney, and they actually pull strings to get me into the most eminent, one of them, pediatricians in the city. I happily grab Ben, put him in the rental car, carry him to this pediatrician. And I am a white male walking into a lovely pediatrician waiting room with, Ben is dark brown. It's no mystery. Ben. And I'm a white male walking into this pediatrician room. I look around. There are only white women of a certain social class. All very well coiffed, all looking very happy, all with lovely white babies and children. It's a big room. I'm the only man, and Ben is the only black person in the room. Suddenly, someone comes out from the back of the room and says, "Oh, we have a place for you to sit where you'd be much more comfortable." Well, there are weaknesses between being part of the white ruling class. I think immediately, well, isn't this sweet? This is so nice, so nice. And I get up and I pick Ben up, who was sleeping beautifully at that point. And he's just out. He's 2.5 weeks old, so he's still a tiny thing. And they lead me to this wonderful chair right next to the coffee machine, next to the medical supplies room. And I'm sitting in this chair in the back of the office, and it actually takes me a minute. I'm not the brightest, sharpest tack at this moment. It takes me a minute to realize I've been put into a little private ghetto because, number one, I was a man. Probably I got bad points for being a white man with, oh Lord, a black baby. And I was put back there out of their wonderfully white waiting room. Now, this was in 2002. It's the 21st century. But I should also mention that because of New Orleans at that point being the town that it was, huge racial divides in New Orleans, huge racial divides, that while I was down there with Ben going to the pediatricians, they also asked me, would I like a second baby? Also African American. Would I like to go home with 2? I said, I can't. I know my limits. I have a child turning 1, and I have a newborn. As much as I would say, oh, sure, let's get a whole big family real fast. I said no. But I will tell you that other child never was placed in the United States. He was adopted in the Netherlands. Because it was, at this point, nearly impossible to place black children in New Orleans with any families at that point. And that, I think, is a sad statement of our life right now in our society. But anyway, I'm in this back waiting area next to the copy machine and the medical supplies closet. And finally, I'm here to see the doctor. Well, this wonderful gray-haired white doctor walks in, nods at me, looks at Ben, and his eyebrows go up. His nurse or assistant, if there was a nurse Ratched, if I say anything to you, sort of iron hair, white, comes in. And so they're examining Ben, and he was adding weight tremendously. He had gained, when you have a newborn, they often lose weight after birth. Well, Ben had started a period of gaining 3 pounds a week, which he did for the first 4 months. So Ben was fine. They recommended moving on to soy formula. But as I was sitting there, they basically ignored me, are looking at Ben, and as if I am not in the room, the doctor says to the nurse, says it this way, do you think we should tell him? And the nurse says, oh, I don't know. Now, they never told me what they thought I should know, but I will tell you that I knew they were wondering whether they should give me a lecture on the advisability of a white man adopting a black infant. Now, whether or not you agree with that, it's not their place to do it, but I'm disturbed that they felt they could have that conversation with kind of me in the room, which, when I look at my own family trajectory, I go back, I'll tell you a little story before I start discussion of anything you want to talk about. But my mother's family comes from Virginia, and we're in both my mother's parents taught college in Virginia. This is about right after the First World War, not the Second World War. So in my mother's childhood, George Washington Carver, if you know who George Washington Carver is, an eminent black scientist of the 19th and 20th centuries, was asked to speak. And the college, was a man's college, largely preparing Methodist ministers for moving on to seminary. Well, George Washington Carver, an eminent scientist, was invited, and it had been arranged that he would live while he was on campus with my grandparents, which I'm still somewhat amazed. This is 1926. White family, eminent black, but he's to live with my parents. They live on the second floor of an old house, and Dr. Hillman lives on the first. But he's to live with my parents, and he's to take his meals in the dining hall. Well, wouldn't you know, in 1926, all these future Methodist ministers had a demonstration that a black man could not eat in the same room as they did. So Dr. Carver ate his meals with my grandparents and stayed with my grandparents and actually became a wonderful friend of the family and had correspondence back and forth. So I think of the world, yes, there was a world of, let's say, Virginia in 1926 where it wasn't safe to be black, even if you were the majority in that state. But in 2002, while some rights had been gained and wonderful things had occurred, it wasn't in some ways a different world. It wasn't a different world for me when we adopted Ben. Now, Ben and Matthew is the older. He's 13 and a half now. And Ben is 12 and a half, but he's almost as tall. Ben's here. He's here. He's 12 and a half. We think he's going to be well over 6 feet. So, they are the lights of my life. When Matthew was 4 and a half, we moved out of New York City. We did not want to raise our children to be comfortable riding the subway to school without parent supervision. And if any of you are New York children, or you have New York children, I don't mean to say anything mean, but you have to. When you have children in New York City, they develop a certain sophistication and veneer of capability. I mean, you have to. You don't raise children in New York City without being able to let them go a little bit, and they lose a little bit of childhood. We didn't want that. So, much to the chagrin of a large community, we upped. We left careers, we left everything, and we moved out to the country, to the Schoharie Valley, west of wonderful farm community. And that is how we came to be here. And it's been a good thing. Our children think that Middleburg, both of them think that Middleburg is the best place possible to grow up. Is there discrimination? Yes. In growing up, are there families that would not have my children in their house? Could be black, could be because one's black, one's Latino. Could be because it's gay male parents. Oh, yes. But you have to sail over those. You have to fight the battles that you can. And you have to move on to build a strong family, build children who know what's important and what's not. And right now, we are as happy as can be. Even though we had the flood took us a little bit more than a year to overcome. And last fall, Ben had a little alcohol. He was doing an experiment for school with an alcohol burner, and he yelled to me, "Dad, I'm going to put this on the porch." Well, the porch was wood. So all I yelled was, "Not on the porch, put it outside," because alcohol burners can reignite, if you know alcohol burners. Well, I didn't pay this bad parent moment. I didn't really pay. He told me he'd put it out on the gravel. Well, our driveway is gravel. He didn't. He put it on the gravel. We have 2 feet of gravel around the house. He put it on the gravel by the house. Later that night, it reignited and started the house on fire. Yeah, but we caught it early. When the house starts filling with smoke, So, you have your good days and your bad days. But I think from the trajectory of my life, growing up in the 50s and the 60s, before you would dare speak the name of anything like homosexuality, to being the day now where I can live in a rural community, be an integral part of that community, and all of that means we can be a triracial, same-sex family, and that's what we are, and it's a good thing. And now I can worry about how to get my children through high school, how to motivate my younger child, who is as smart as a tack, sharp as a tack, but isn't really motivated because school bores him. Ben, smart. Could care less. He doesn't want to study it. My older son, has more learning disabilities, and though he will present beautifully. He's a charming boy, funny, and will read out loud, but he won't understand what he's reading so beautifully. So I am now at the point where, like all other parents, I can worry how to propel my children as happy, independent individuals into the world. And that is where I'm going to end what I am talking about. Bye, Ruth.
Bye.
Bye,
It's so wonderful hearing your story.
Oh, it's lovely. I saw.
People are lucky.
Bye,
Sam.
Bye. Can you talk about, we've talked about that you guys have lost jobs.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not unusual even in this day and age to lose jobs because you're gay. You say, those gay people, they have so many rights now. Well, no, you will still lose jobs. The worst job I ever lost was years ago but still, I was an adult. I was working. Doug and I were together. I was actually, and I've always been openly gay since my late teens. And That was a long time ago. It was over 40 years ago, so the world was a little bit different then. But I actually had 100% a job evaluation, and they discovered, not too hard, that I was gay, and the head of the organization called me in and said, I just don't think people like you should work in this industry. And that is something that is still going on. I lost a job after we moved up here, but it was a clever sort of, I lost a job in 2009 for being very good at my job, but how can I say this? It was they kept me around. I raised money. A lot of my life has been spent raising money. I've been very good. I can talk to you. We can just become friends, and then I'll shake you down for large amounts of money. So I'm very good at that. Large donations from wealthy old birds and anyone. So I worked for let's just say an unnamed organization in the upper New York area. I did not know it at the time. The personnel director, this is in 2009, personnel director had been regaling her staff with stories of, do you know why gay men adopt children? It's so they can sexually abuse them. You're a director of personnel for a major organization in 2009, and you're allowed to say in an open office that the only reason that I adopted children was so I could sexually abuse them, and say it more than once. So anyway, there were one or two board members that happened to agree, but I was so good at my job, I brought millions of dollars, until the organization cheated New York State. It was a nonprofit organization. They cheated New York State, and the New York State Attorney General forbade them from doing sorts of business with New York State, whereupon their fundraising dried up. So, at that point, all the little chatter of gay, bad, dropped. At that point, they decided they could not fire me. I'm too good at what I do. What they did was they ended my whole department. They fired me and fired everyone that reported to me. Well, actually, they gave everyone who reported to me after 3 months other jobs. But in truth, as I found out later, that was purely because I'm gay. And for the director of personnel, because I adopted children to sexually abuse them. So, as the world has changed or not changed, that still goes on. And I'm a well-educated, comfortable, professional person who has, I think my bio, I've been president of 2 foundations. I've been a college executive for 15 years, and I've been a highly paid consultant to the nonprofit industry for 20-some years. So I'm not one of the people who's at risk, but there are many people who don't have the resources or the experience or the education that I have, that things like this happen to every day, who have no recourse. And so that's 2009. That's still going on. But I'm a happy person. I'll tell you, when it took me a long time to adopt our first child, who was Latino, who was a boy. And as I said, when we adopted our second child, it happened very quickly. As I gained my younger son, Ben, who's now 12 and a half, I was offered, just on the spur of the moment, a second child in New Orleans. This was in New Orleans, where black-white relations are well, then were just not some of the worst, I think, in the South. I think that there are many older children because of the racism inherent in our society, in our social system, which is alive. Despite we've come so far, it's alive. Oh, it's alive and well. I think any time, I think it's sometimes it's social workers or people who are working in the industry who don't try to match families. I know, on the other hand, there are so many children of color who are still in the system and are still looking for parents. It's a very frustrating thing. It's a very hard thing. Anytime you adopt children, whether it's private or it's a public adoption, you will possibly have children with more needs. Both of my sons, even my smart as a whip, younger son, terrifyingly smart, very self-determined, has some issues. But he's so smart, he just blows past them. That's how smart Ben is. You will end up with more challenges or perceived deficits or behavior problems. You do, and I think that stops some people. But we are a society, I'd say it's on all sides. We are a society when, if you're white, you have trouble identifying as being a parent. For some people, that's a child of color. I mean, Yes, it's a terrible thing, and I don't know, I don't think there's an easy answer as to why it's happening, other than institutional racism that continues in our system. And that's rather a broad statement, but it's something that I know is true. I think whenever you have children, I wish I could have decided how to do it, but because we are a verbal family and we talk a lot, we were very quickly discussing things. I mean, you always want to, on one hand, protect your children. You want to step in and you want to unfold your... And let's say when Ben was young, Ben's 12 and a half, and Ben, his ego is just fine. He's a strong, he's going to be just fine. If I live through his adolescence, he's going to be just fine. If he lives through his adolescence. Let's say someone called him nigger. What a horrible word. Not because of the word, but because of what it's meant. It's a word of hate. It doesn't happen very often, but it does. When he was little, I would step in and do whatever was necessary, not only to stop that word, but to explain it to Ben, to educate some way, sometime indirectly, the person who had said that word. I mean, because there are children, and that's a blessing for them. I think we're very good parents, but because they're children of same-sex gay men, and if you have to know that, I mean, remember the word gay. Gay has never stopped being like a special word in high school or middle school. It's not a good word to use. So I don't think there's ever been a time of a conscious decision for us to talk. We talk about everything. We talk about, you're faced with it. You have to, how you talk about it is a decision. I mean, Ben thinks he's just like me. And you know what? He is just like me. We share many personality traits. We have the same likes. We like the same food. Ben and I are very, very alike. We happen to be different colors. And he's any person who doesn't fit the stereotype, increasingly rare stereotype of of a heterosexual couple with 2.5 children is at risk of discrimination. Last week we were talking about ISIS in the Middle East. Well, ISIS, of course, we could have a long discussion on Middle East policy and why it's come to that, and the First World War and the division of property against ethnic. We won't even go there. But ISIS is in the news, and it's beheaded people, and it's burned people. And I happened to mention, they were talking about all these terrible things. I said, oh, did you know that if you're gay in ISIS territories, they take you to the top of the tall building and they push you off? That's the solution for being gay in that area. And so we talked. I will say Ben was outraged and used some 4-letter words to describe his feelings at that point. I said, oh, Ben, we don't speak that way, but you're right. You're right. So I don't know if you make a you can't step back and say, oh, they're 10 now or they're 11 now. I'm going to have a decision about how I'm going to talk about something. You know, as a parent, you're faced with things that you don't always have an answer to, and you do your best. But I think if you're honest with your children, if you teach them respect for themselves and for the people around them, you help them understand that when people try to hurt them, more often with words than with, thank goodness, more often with words than with clubs, that says as much about the person who's doing the hurting or doing the disrespecting as it says much more about them than it does about them as a person, but still that is hurtful. So I think, golly, as soon as they can talk, you're having some discussions with them of what it means to be part of our family, and to be proud of who you are and to be proud of our family, and then to try to share that sense of pride and self-worth with the people around you.
And so I have 2 black boys as well.
Okay.
And so, but for myself, especially with the oldest boy who's about to go to college. And I've shared here just being, especially with all of the unarmed black males who have been killed.
Yes.
And the conversations I've had with them.
Yes.
Because it's like you have to prepare them. Absolutely. For what you hope doesn't happen.
For what, and yes.
And so, how do you speak to them about that? And just
they're the ones who talk the conversation, because they know. I mean, they know if you dress a certain way and if you're a certain color and you're in a certain neighborhood, or act in a certain way, or are perceived to act, or just be. If you're driving a car on a certain road and you're a person of color, let's say you're a black male, young black male, that in and of itself is a dangerous thing. I think it's so hard. They understand that it's a dangerous world. I don't know, at 12 and 13, there's no way that I can help them understand it. But I don't know how. We have an extended family of white and black and Latino. So we have lots of aunts and uncles who come from every color. So everyone is part of a conversation and talks. You know, it's not just, oh, you're going to college, we're going to talk about this now. It's an evolving conversation. But I don't know how you feel, but I'm scared. I think Ben's going to come back with black power, say, Whitey, maybe I'll have Rastafarian, maybe we'll now be in. I'm prepared for that, that sense of, I'm scared about as he gets older.
Yeah. We're in a predominantly white community.
Of course.
So we tell them you can't do what your friends do, because who will the neighbors remember? And you're just being silly doing kid things.
And you're doing kid things.
But you can't. So it's just always preparation for them. And it takes away. We've had conversations since they were 5 or 6 when the oldest was 7, he was able
Right.
to identify an incident that happened,
Mm-hmm.
and he called it the racism. I think I had the racism happened. And
The racism.
Yes. So, but just being able to identify the different ways that can manifest as well. So the community is good because people will have experiences.
In our small community, we're a small rural community, a very small town. There's more than one interracial family. Our school system from pre-K through 12 is under 1,000. We're a small rural district, but we have 5 interracial, and I'm talking Asian, Filipino, black, white, mixed families, even in our... So on one hand, everyone in town knows my children as individuals. That's great for in town. But the bigger world, there are no easy answers. Was that both questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just wondering how you went about sharing and discussing.
It's a never-ending discussion. It's not always so overt. It's listening, and then it's trying to give a reasoned response, or sometimes it's just listening and it's throwing out, a care, and you have to know how you're being perceived. And the world around them is communicated enough. I mean, they know that to be young and black is to be in danger. Mm-hmm. I think anytime we change requirements for living, either through judicial action or through legislation, and that they're socially progressive things that recognize the rights of people, irregardless of what color or sexual orientation broadly they are. Whenever we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of any other person through those judicial or legislative, it's a wonderful thing to celebrate and to affirm. To believe that just because that law or that ruling is in effect, that it's dramatically going to solve all the problems, it's really just the start. We've probably made it the first 20%. By the time you get the law, you're still about 80%. And I mean, I said to Sam, the thing that I'm impressed about, the way I say things have changed, things have changed. Things have changed a lot. But I'm more impressed by the fact that more people are talking about how far we have to go than the fact that things have gone so far. So I celebrate all these legislative, judicial accomplishments. I think they're appropriate. I think obviously they're good. I think anything that affirms every individual's worth and dignity is good, but it's just a start. You're just taking the first few steps just to get to that tremendous point. After that, it's learning to live the changes, and it's learning to overcome or let it run out. We used to travel down south with my mother, and so we'd see, some of my earliest memories from, let's say, the early 60s. I was born in 55. President Kennedy was elected when I was 5, I know the special culture. Obviously, my mother's parents were progressive Southern people. Dr. Carver, family friend, lives and eats in their upstairs of their house in 1926. Even with that, my mother would have said that she was not without racism. But I wasn't grown up until I understood that while she still felt some degree of racism, the old separate but equal, yeah. But she knew enough to not put that on me. She knew enough not to to set a better example for me. But it's a long process, irregardless. The laws and everything, good, but by the time you have to live it, it takes decades. Right. I'll walk into a room, I put a coat and tie on, I walk into a room, and if I know how to do it. I'm a person you call sir. I have some younger gay people. Let's say, the younger the gay couple at church. They had a child and he went back.
Yeah.
Oh golly, they're not that much. I didn't think. The younger one, which golly has got to be in his late 30s, just automatically calls me sir. I just have to live with that. Yeah. So, but you're right. I can a chameleon. I can adapt real well to where someone's not going to come after me with a club, just simply because of the color of my skin and the way I can look. I look like a good old boy wasp. That's not who I am inside, but that's who I can look like. And that is a benefit. Oh, I know it. That's a benefit and a burden. It's a burden. Church. We attend a church in Schenectady. It's affiliated of two denominations. It's American Baptist, not Southern. Not Southern Baptist. It's American Baptist, which has a long-standing progressive, and it's United Church of Christ. Not Church of Christ, United Church of Christ. It's two of those denominations that have joined together. I will say that the reason we're in a Schenectady church, I don't know about Sam, is when we moved to our small town of Middleburg, I talked to lots of the local churches, and I even talked to the pastor of the local Reformed church, which on paper should have been a good church for our family. This was in 2006. I talked to the pastor who was a woman pastor at a Reformed Church of America. And Mary told me she would be pleased if we would attend her church. You think as a woman she'd have some sort of consciousness. But Mary said she'd be pleased if we could attend her church, but she felt she needed to share with me that she viewed that our relationship was a sinful one. And she might occasionally preach from the pulpit that to be gay was a sin. Whereupon my only rule in any sort of church, and I believe in church is a good structure and discipline for family and children, even when they don't want to go, but that's teenagers. My one rule for church is I will not sit in a congregation or a synagogue or any house of worship where I'm not respected or my family is somehow, told we are sinning. So, having not found a local congregation, we went further afield. When we first started traveling when the boys were young, we would carry all of our adoption papers and our court papers. Us too. Yeah, you know what it is. Well, when you have little children that aren't your color and you don't fit families, you bring more documentation with you in case anyone asks questions. Very seldom, and I think this is a function of I'm still a scary white man if you cross me. Don't ever cross me. No. I can present, my white, progressive white grandmother. I do that real well. So that is in part an insulation, but lately we aren't as careful. They're older. If anyone, we were having this discussion in the car. As I travel with children, we have wonderful discussions about perception and family and the whole, we don't pay attention to people in shopping malls who look at us. You know, Ben, because he is black, is very sensitive. He says, they're pointing at me because I'm black. I said, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but why do you care? Yeah. I think we have many fewer issues. We do choose where to go. And we're not likely to visit Alabama, just on principle now. We took the boys to Europe this summer. We took them to London and Paris. Before they got any more teenage-ish, we figured we would bite the bullet and take them as a family before they really just, I don't want to see you, I don't want to talk to you, you're stupid, you're silly, how can you open your mouth and say that sort of thing? Which, I hate to tell you, is pretty much teenage behavior. And it was actually going through customs that we occasionally had, not in Europe. Coming back into this country, it was customs that took us a little bit more. I'm sorry, are these your children? Yes. And you are? Well, I'm their parent. And this gentleman? I'm their parent. Oh, so you're both the parents of these? About 5 minutes of that, and I was disappointed because that was a federal customs official who I would have thought had progressed a little bit more, but, you know, he just was having a real hard time wrapping his perception around us as a family. But we are careful where we travel. There's not a lot of overt discrimination, you know. But years ago we did. We don't travel with their adoption. I don't travel with adoption. The judge decreed. We did, I adopted the children first as the individual. Then we did a second parent adoption, a whole different legal procedure in the state of New York. So we had a wonderful little picture in the New York Daily. We did second parent adoptions in late 2005 before we moved up here. And it happened to be adoption day. So I had all the reporters around. And there's a wonderful picture of me holding Ben's hand, which you see as this little tiny black hand and this big white hand. It's only the hand. They seem to think that was a real, yeah, I know. Don, you can roll your eyes. I know, but there are many worse pictures you can have, but that was the one that came out of that.
I have a question. How are they, because we've talked about this before, but we haven't talked about it in a while. How are they doing the mother thing now?
Do you mean their birth mother?
Yeah, like I know there was a period where she died. You tell her when she died.
The interesting thing, I try to always be honest, pretty honest with children. This is a whole adoption thing. They've always known they're adopted. Rule number one, they've always known that their mothers were being very brave in trying to find a better life for them. It wasn't because they weren't loved. It was because they were loved that someone made a great sacrifice. Now that may or may not, as a small child, they need to sense the sense of love and not being abandoned as much as you can. I met Ben's mother.
I remember in the hospital.
I wanted to meet his mother. I always want to be able to tell my children their birth mother. You know, she had a real interest. You have her nose. You know, you have that twitch you have. I saw in your mother. I asked, but I never got to meet Matthew's mother. And I know more about the mother, I know more about them as individuals. Matthew cares more about, Matt is much more of he's so much more subject to peer. He's my sweet child. He still wonders what it would be like to have a mother. I could tell him, this is Mom, I just need my hair. I'm the nurturing, I'm the person who sits up with them and they vomit on me, and all those things that, a parent does who's a custodial parent. So that's me. When he gets into a snit, wants to meet his...
I know the story.
You know this, yeah, he does. Ben doesn't care. Ben says he doesn't care. I tell the boys if we can find their mothers. Ben's mother lived in New Orleans. And many people in New Orleans, after Katrina, were settled either in Baton Rouge or in Texas. A lot of people in Houston. I've done searches, and I can't locate Ben's mother. Ben doesn't care as much. Matt cares. And I just say, well, let me dig out your adoption records. I'll show you paperwork, because they're things that the mothers wrote out. And I have copies. I have copies of their birth records. I have everything. So I believe in sharing that. Matt really feels loved and enfolded in family. He does. He just wonders what it would be like to have a mother. So I tell him, when you're a little bit older, you need to give some distance to your birth mom. We'll go searching for them. But Matt, more important than it is for Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, the world, I rule you. Do what I say. That's Ben, my younger one.